Rob and Vicki Graves had found what appeared to be their dream home, looking to escape the big city life and take up a more rural one for themselves and their 2 teenage sons. They found Fox Hollow Farm and were shocked at how affordable it was for the sheer size and quality of the property. Sensing that it was too good to be true, they asked what could possibly be wrong with it, because at a passing glance, it seemed absolutely gorgeous. Then it came to Rob. He had remembered the name from a news broadcast many years ago. Unbeknownst to him and his wife, they were now standing on the very same grounds that were once owned by Herbert Baumeister, the notorious serial killer. They immediately brought this up to the real estate agent who was showing them the property, and were immediately told that that was indeed the case. That the private investor had indeed purchased the estate from the widow of Herb following the disturbing discovery of the bodies back in the 1990s. But that it had been completely remodeled from head to toe, removing any and all remnants of what it looked like when the murders had taken place all those years ago. But that's why it was indeed so affordable, because no one wanted to live there due to the history. After some further discussion among the couple, they ultimately decided to purchase the property. Within a couple weeks, the family moves in and falls in love with Fox Hollow Farm. The teenage sons soon make it a habit to play outside and then wash off in the pool in the basement, soon tracking dirt and gravel all throughout the home. One day, Vicki is vacuuming up the dirt that the boys had brought in from the outside around the pool, when suddenly her vacuum loses power. Believing that perhaps she had accidentally unplugged it from the outlet, she plugged it back in and continued her work. Within several more minutes, it happened again. Perplexed this time because she was even more aware and careful about the cord and the outlet, she knew she hadn't unplugged it. So she plugged it back in and triple checked that it wasn't just falling out of the outlet by pulling the cord. Ever more aware this time, she goes back to vacuuming, but keeping a present eye on the cord itself, and to her amazement, it pulls out on its own, as if someone had grabbed and pulled it out of the socket. Startled, she drops the vacuum and is beside herself. She doesn't know how to make sense of what had just happened, and this would just be the beginning of the strangeness that would occur. Rob worked at a car dealership, and one of his employees was a man named Joe. Joe had been a great employee, but had a problem of being chronically late most of the time. As he probed to figure out what was going on, Joe informed Rob that he lived over an hour away and really needed the job and would be willing to move closer if the opportunity presented itself. Well, Rob thought about it and ended up offering Joe a place to rent. Located on Fox Hollow Farm, they had a guest house that they were considering renting out as apartments for quite some time, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity to benefit everyone involved. Joe would indeed move in just a few days later. It takes several hours, but within that time frame, they're able to get everything inside and finish the move. Exhausted, Joe decides to retire for the night with his dog, Fred. As he lays down to sleep in his newly set up bed, he then finds himself in a horrific nightmare. He's being chased throughout Fox Hollow Farm by something he can't see. The dream is so intense that it causes him to sleepwalk, which wasn't something that he was known to do. He began to run while still dreaming, and ran directly into the door frame as he tried to escape the guest house. Falling back, he knocked into a nearby glass of water, which fell and shattered, cutting his hands. The impact and cutting of his hands finally woke him up, and he was forced to sit back and ponder just what had taken place. And things would only intensify from here. Another day soon after, Rob was painting the side of their home a different color. As he and his wife remarked on how nice the finished job will be, she spots something out of the corner of her eye. She had seen a man in a red shirt staring at them. As she broke away from her husband and began to approach the figure, it started to walk away from her and quickly disappeared as if it never existed. The couple then called out and checked the perimeter, but never found anyone. They dismissed the person as nothing more than a curious trespasser. I mean, after all, they did purchase a serial killer's home. They just had to accept that curious people may sneak up just to get a look at their home. Later that night, Joe was doing the dishes in his apartment when he suddenly gets a series of knocks on his front door. Telling the person it'll just be a minute, as he dries his hands off to go and answer the door, the series of knocks begin to grow louder and more aggressive. Thinking it was extremely strange or extremely urgent concerning Vicki or Rob, he went and answered the door as it was still being knocked upon. However, as he opened the door, there was no one to be found. Automatically on guard, he peers outside. The knocking had been happening when he answered the door, so no person could have got very far while he answered mid-knock. He glanced around, and yet saw and heard nothing. He stepped outside and began to examine the roof and the nearby areas, and still there was nothing. Thoroughly weirded out at this point, he made his way back inside and bolted the door locked behind him. He started to make his way back to the kitchen to finish doing his dishes, when he spotted a man standing in his bedroom, staring at him. Upon spotting the figure, his dog begins to growl and make sounds that he's never heard him make before, staring directly in the direction of the bedroom. Already on edge, he ran into the bedroom and flicked the light on, only to discover that there was again no one there. Searching the entire apartment, he again found nothing. Trying to rationalize and clear his mind, he decided to take his dog Fred for a walk to calm down and unwind for the evening. While on his walk around the property, he thought to check on Rob and Vicki's house to see if the lights were on. This would indicate to him that perhaps they were the ones who had knocked on his door, and therefore he could rest easy and figure out what it was about the following morning. However, upon arriving at their house, he found it completely blacked out. They had already gone to bed for the night. Fred, who was always a loyal and obedient dog, always walked with him without a leash, and would always follow his commands. However, tonight would be a different story. Deciding to head back to his apartment, he motioned for Fred to join him, but the dog would not budge. He suddenly began to growl and then bolted into the nearby tree line. Instinctively, Joe ran after his dog, but not before seeing what his dog was running after. Before his eyes and the very same tree line was a man in a red shirt. Although he was absolutely terrified, Joe couldn't let anything happen to his beloved dog, so he continued to run towards this man, when suddenly, whoever or whatever this was disappeared before his eyes. Although slightly behind, he would quickly catch up to Fred, and now noticed him not acting aggressive at all, but rather showing his belly in submission, staring in the direction of Joe. Joe, knowing his dog, knew that something very strange had to be up with him. He suddenly felt as if someone was staring directly at him. He slowly turned around to see the apparition of a man in a red shirt with a twisted face staring back at him just several feet away. Joe, as most of us would, ran out of there as fast as he could, his loyal companion following him. The two run as fast as they can back to the apartment, where they rush inside, lock and deadbolt the door, and nervously watch out of the blinds for the rest of the night. The following morning, an even more exhausted Joe makes his way to Vicki and Rob's house to discuss the prior night's events. As he's telling both of them what happened, Vicki starts to become emotional. She too had seen the man in red just days earlier. She points to where she saw him, and lo and behold, it's the exact same spot that Joe had encountered the entity the night before. As the day progressed to night, Joe yet again found himself in his apartment, hoping to finally get some rest. But as he settled down in his bed, he was suddenly startled by knocking at his door. As he yelled out, "Who is it?" as he made his way towards the door, he didn't receive an audible answer back. just more aggressive knocking at the door. The door itself now is shaking. Facing his fear of the unknown, mid-knock, Joe throws the door open, only to meet face to face with nothing. As he frantically looks around the yard while holding the door, he notices that the door's knocking apparatus is sticking straight out as if someone is holding it. It then drops one last time, knocking the door. Absolutely petrified, Joe slams the door and locks it. As he tries to catch his breath and takes several steps backwards, he sees the doorknob begin to turn. Then, without warning, the door bursts open, shattering the lock. The open door yet again reveals no one. After a moment of frozen terror, Joe runs outside and into the front yard of his apartment, screaming and searching all around for just who could be doing this. After several minutes, he stares back into the house through the open front door and sees a man dressed in all white standing there. He's soaked from head to toe in what appears to be water and is screaming in a muted voice as if he's being held underwater. He then bolts towards Joe and seemingly disappears into a mist. Frantically calling out to his dog Fred to accompany him, Joe frantically makes his way to Rob and Vicky's house on the property. He's so terrified that he's shaking now, and Rob and Vicky are just as scared. They now truly believe that they are dealing with something paranormal in nature. In order to rationalize the situation and make sense of what was taking place, they begin to believe that they're experiencing the result of the murders conducted by Herbert Baumeister, and that his victims are either trapped here somehow, or their energy is stuck in an endless loop, replaying their final and tragic moments over and over and over again. Refusing to return to his apartment, Rob and Vicky, being the supportive friends they were, agreed that Joe could stay the night with them, and together they would begin researching online to try and formulate some kind of a plan of action of what to do next. As they collectively scour the Baumeister case information, they find themselves looking at the list of identified victims. As they get deeper into the details, Joe is shocked. He stops them on a picture of a man in a white shirt. That was the man I saw in my apartment, who was soaked from head to toe and screaming. Although this information still scares them, it does help reassure them that they are indeed dealing with the victims of this horrendous tragedy. They are especially convinced, considering many of the remains have never been identified, so they continue to research the case. After several uneventful days, Joe finds himself almost compelled to walk around the property with his dog, except this time in broad daylight. So, apprehensively, he makes his way with Fred to the area where both he and Vicky had seen the man in red on separate occasions. Just past the tree line on the walking path, Joe is stopped by what looks to be a bone. He believes that it's impossible that such a bone could have been missed during the extensive searches over the years, but nonetheless, it was right here, right now, as if it had been placed there for him to discover. Quickly consulting and showing Rob and Vicky the discovery, they too believed that this could be a bone belonging to the mysterious man in red. They ended up contacting the lead detective on the Baumeister case and submitted the bone, which turned out to be a human femur bone, in as evidence and for analysis. They then requested if the investigator himself could come out to the property and explain to them just where things had taken place, so they could have a better understanding of what had happened, to which he obliged. Several days passed, and Joe by this point had made his way back to his apartment to try and settle back in given the new information. While on his computer checking his emails, he began to hear a scraping, almost metallic-like sound originating from the kitchen. Upon further examination, he sees that all of his butcher knives from his knife block have been neatly arranged in his sink, placed in a row, equally spaced from one another. Glancing around the room, he spots fresh, deep cuts in the wood of the nearby counter cabinet. He believes that this could be a sign for one of the victims crying for help. He starts to try and figure out the mystery. He takes out his phone and begins recording, asking probing questions to whoever or whatever could be there, in hopes of helping them in any way that he can. Prior to this, of course, he turned off any and all appliances that could interfere with the process. He begins by asking a series of questions and doesn't seem to get much of anything, at least not audibly. But then towards the end of his questions, Fred begins to growl, the same eerie growl he had any time they had experienced something previously. Taking this as confirmation that perhaps his companion could see or hear something that he couldn't, he quickly downloads the audio file and begins to listen to it on his computer. And to his shock, he did indeed receive a response. This is the clip of the actual EVP that was recorded.
Who keeps walking in the kitchen?
He believes he hears the married one. But in all of their research, all of the victims were young, single gay men. The only one who was married was one Herb Baumeister. This revelation is startling. He not only believes that the victims were trapped within the grounds of Fox Hollow Farm, but that perhaps the serial killer himself could too be trapped here. What would follow would be dozens of paranormal investigations. And those investigations would lead the group to believe that they were not only dealing with the spirits of the victims haunting the grounds, but either a dark entity impersonating Baumeister or the killer himself. Several years after the events, the Graves family would end up selling Fox Hollow Farm, and it would continue to change hands over the years since then, leading to multiple new owners of the property. And although new information doesn't seem to be publicly available, it's still considered one of the most haunted places in Indiana, if not the world, given its unique and gruesome history. An independent film would go on to be made about it, called The Haunting of Fox Hollow Farm, and Robert Graves, along with another man named Richard Estep, who led many paranormal investigations at Fox Hollow Farm, would co-write a book detailing the family's creepy experiences and what they believed to be ultimately happening. So in conclusion, we know that Herb Baumeister was mentally ill ultimately, but what makes this case so strange and so compelling to me is that he was an outstanding member of his community. For the longest time, he was the smiling neighbor, the charitable businessman, the happy family man, and overall, a pillar of normalcy. But behind closed doors, his psyche, his soul, contained a darkness that most of us will never be able to comprehend, yet alone unravel and understand. So could the murderous deeds of a twisted individual trap souls on a property and perhaps open some kind of a portal? Could the unleashing of such energy like what is expressed in a violent death contribute to something like this? If it wasn't what's known as an intelligent haunting, where the spirits are aware of what has happened to them and are indeed trapped there, which very well could still be the case, then perhaps it could be a residual haunting, where the events are of such magnitude and strength that they play on a loop for all time, but the souls who were involved have long since moved on. These are questions that we may never have answers to, but all things that we should ponder. But one thing is for certain: the malicious calculation of Herb Baumeister and the horrendous things that he did to the suspected 25 victims at Fox Hollow Farms should never be forgotten. They are indeed still identifying and using updated technology to identify remains that are still being found on the grounds. This has happened as recent as November of 2022. So if you happen to be a family member of someone that you suspect could be connected to this case, just know that my heart truly does go out to you. And please contact the Hamilton County Coroner's Office at 317-770-4415. Besides remembering what happened, I also urge you to please respect the victims and their families, as well as the family of Herb Baumeister, if you should ever have anything to do with them. Thank you all so much for watching. I know this one is a little different from the cases I typically cover here, but it's just such a unique case that it kind of took on a life of its own, and I felt that it was important to get the details as concrete and accurate as I could. So please leave a like, tell me what you thought down in the comments below, and please share and subscribe. All that truly helps me out so much more than you know. Other than that, I hope all of you are doing great as always. I pray that your year is off to a wonderful start, and I hope your mental health is doing well and that you're doing well. And hopefully we'll all continue to have a fantastic year. Until next time, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Please stay safe out there and take care.